Comic-Con presents Behind the Comic Book Podcast.
Hey everybody, it's Mr. 845 here, and we're doing another one of our Icon Comic-Con Behind the Comic Book Podcast interviews. This is Todd. Todd, tell us, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Todd Matthy, and I am a comic book writer. I kind of got started. I've always wanted to be a comic writer, because I really couldn't draw that well. But and I currently have work with. My first book was published with Dynamite. It was Robots versus Princesses,
Okay.
and then I had currently I've done some self-publishing, including some stuff with including stuff on Webtoon with Tales of the Aurora. And currently I'm working with Tidal Wave Productions. I've done a Black Sabbath biography comic, a Foo Fighters biography comic, a Rush biography comic, and I wrote the Atlas miniseries, and I'm about to start or we've just we are producing right now a new 12-issue series called The Odyssey, which I'm
Nice.
excited to
Awesome.
share everyone.
There's a lot of work we got to get into, right? So first and foremost, if comic book companies out there or just indies want to work with you, what's the best way to get in contact with you in the sense of whether that be social, email? What's the best way?
I prefer email, and my email is just Todd, Todd, period, Matthy, Matthy, at gmail.com.
All right.
You can DM me on Facebook, but I try to keep Facebook to close friends, or so people who I know, and or you could find me on Twitter at Todd Matthy with no spaces.
All right, awesome. And so, like, let's kind of go into it. I know that you've gotten a lot of different works under your belt already. What kind of started you into this writing world? I know that you kind of delved into it a little bit, saying that you're not good at the drawing part, but let's start in the beginning, like when you were younger. What started you on your path of writing?
Well, my mom likes to say that it was when I was in like preschool, and a woman taught us how to like fold paper together and make books. And so I just kept drawing books, that I liked. I think around like 1990, I would always, in terms of comics I read, like my dad would get me Superman comics. I think the first comic I really followed was Transformers.
Okay.
I would always look forward to finding that whenever I could, but I never knew there were like comic stores or anything there. So, and I remember getting the final issue, and reading it with my dad, and it was just like, there was the whole thing with Simon Furman that he wrote in the letter, and my dad's like, and I'm like, so when's the next? I'm like, all right, I can't wait to see what happens next. My dad's like, I don't think there's gonna be a next issue. And that was my first time realizing something would end. That was my first final issue. But I really, I guess you could say, got into it through the old Marvel cards. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
Yeah, from the early 90s. And of like the Jim Lee, and of course the Jim Lee cards. And then I started seeing I just started getting comics like I would get like X-Men, X-Force, but the big one where I really was following was The Death of Superman.
Oh yeah, that
And
was a
we
big one
got
in the
that
90s.
thing from start to finish. And it really was from there that I started finding, actual comic stores, going there, buy and getting a pull list, and that's it.
All right, awesome.
To get into writing, I guess you'd say my friends kind of created a comic book club, and I just started coming up with my own characters, and I just got obsessed with, I almost kind of like was, because fourth grade was kind of a tough year for me. Hated my teacher. And so I would like kind of escape into that, into like the drawing and everything. And then I realized, I got so many. Number one, I wasn't that great at drawing. Number two, you have so many ideas, you can't draw them all, as Rob Liefeld kind of showed. Um, but I love Liefeld. And I just started creating, and I didn't realize that there was really a path as a writer until like maybe middle high school when I realized, guys like Frank Miller, Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, probably shouldn't mention that now, but and those guys, Grant Morrison, were all making, money and getting big just by writing the book. So they were able to get a lot of ideas out doing so many books at once. And that's when I was like, all right, I want to do this.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, now I know you named a couple of works. Maybe we could kind of delve into them. So let's kind of start with the first one. I believe you had said that the first one was something that was published by Dynamite.
Yes.
All right, so I think it was I know you went pretty quick, so it was Robots and Princesses.
Yes, robots versus princesses.
Yeah, I got it. So take us like what kind of gave you the idea of writing a comic book about I'm guessing it's robots versus princesses.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah.
so take us through that idea.
It actually came when I mean I'm a teacher and for the day job, and I was subbing at the time. I was in a first grade class. It was the end of the year, and when I became a building sub. When you're a building sub, you kind of just are like at the end of the year, sometimes they send you to rooms just to help out because it was the end of the year and everything had to be packed. It's the usual spiel. And basically, the teacher had given coloring pages to the kids. Robots for the boys, princesses for the girls.
Okay.
And it hit me. Robots against princesses. I didn't think it had ever been done. And I was like, all right, there's something here. My brain just started going to work, figuring out, all right, who are these robots? Who are these princesses? Why are they fighting, obviously? Why are they separated? And I really came up with this, in a tone of Disney meets Transformers, realizing there actually is some crossover, between the two of them. And I just started developing it, and I hit a little wall. Originally, the character Wheeler was supposed to be a good robot who just abandons the war.
Hmm.
Um, and then I ran kind of the idea by a student, and it's of him actually being one of the bad guys,
Okay.
but who defects. And that kind of changed the course of the book. And I only realized like really like about 10 years later that if you're ever asked like, I took classes with Scott Snyder. I'm bouncing all over the place.
It's all good.
And he always said, well, always think about, what is your story about? Like, and I always say like, you know, Scott says Titanic could be a story. What it's about could happen without being on the Titanic.
Hmm.
Um, and when I and Neil Gaiman, and also I took his master class, said things like, like with Midsummer Night's Dream, it's like, well, what is this thing about? Everyone was like, this is all cool, but what it's about?
Hmm.
And I never realized until like maybe 10 years later that Robots versus Princesses was not really about a robot and a princess coming together, but actually about a robot standing up for himself.
Okay.
And that's, I guess, what I would tell people now. With and this princess it gives him the courage to do that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I
But
mean, yeah. So sorry to cut you off, but so in the robots versus princesses guideline, it's like a coming of age story type of.
yeah, I guess I would say it. Yeah, it is a coming of age story. I got to write. I wrote princess songs in it, which were definitely takes you down a path that's interesting. I think it didn't turn out too bad. I think one is definitely a bit of a rip off of a famous one, but I was
I
starting to.
I mean that's kind of flattery, right? But in a sense, you're coming up with a story that not only fits just one demographic, you actually have something that could kind of lapse two different demographics in a younger age type of reading, right?
Right, exactly. And that was, I think, one of like the selling points. And what happened was, how it got picked up was I didn't really pitch it to Dynamite. They came to me. I was at I had been part of a group called Pronto Comics. We kind of did our own things. And I was at Mocha and I met Rich Johnson, just told him about the idea, showed him some art that I had because I was preparing to pitch it. Um, and he said, send it to me. And he loved the idea and he posted about it on Bleeding Cool.
Nice.
And then suddenly Dynamite reached out to me and I was like, yes, this is it. So,
Nice. That's sweet. Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to writing, I'm sure that there is a process. When you are kind of thinking of that idea to write for different either titles, are you pitched the idea, or are the stories coming from you, and then you're delving into that idea, kind of like similar to what you did with the Robots versus Princesses. Like now that you've been a somewhat established, do you have the capability of still keep creating your own? Or are you taking over other people's stories and kind of continuing them on, kind of the way comic books do nowadays?
it depends. With Tidal Wave, I'm using their characters. So, it's their stories, like Tidal Wave they do like 10th Moose and when it came to the biography comics, they asked me to do that. Or I would say, and it started with I wanted to do a Black Sabbath one, and I did it, and then they gave me a couple of others. Whereas with Tidal Wave, like, and then he offered after I sent some samples to Darren, he offered me a revival of the Atlas character, who's basically like a himbo Superman,
Mm-hmm.
and I just started writing that, and then I noticed it. I asked him if I could write, some of his Bold and the Brave book, which is a team-up book, but where it was just characters of 10th Moose. So it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like a DC Comics Presents type book,
Okay.
and that allowed me to kind of explore more of the Tidal Wave universe. But I've added my own things to it, but overall, it's his characters there.
Okay. Now take. Now, I know that you said and you named off a couple of like heavy metal bands, right? So, are
Mhm.
these like living the actual life type of comics of these bands, or is it more like a autobiography? Like, what kind of storylines are those?
It's really just the story of the band. I tried
Like
to,
how they came together and stuff?
yeah, how they came together, what they did, some like, facts about their things. I try to add like some twists to it just to make it more interesting. Like the Rush one, I kind of feel like turned out like a Wikipedia article. Um, and which is something tough, but the Foo Fighters one, I kind of like crafted a thread about a kid who is kind of sort of based on me, where he's at a drawing table and here's Kurt Cobain committed suicide.
Mm,
And then kind of watching like the development of the Foo Fighters while they're while the perception of the Foo Fighters was changing kind of, how it evolved.
mm-hmm.
First it was like, okay, but they're not Nirvana.
Yeah, yeah.
But they eventually became a thing on their own. So I kind of like tried to trace that in as a parallel to all the information in the book. Black Sabbath, what I wanted to do was kind of tell it from Tony Iommi's point of view. And this one I liked because I went back finding all the dialogue are from like interviews with it. And I wanted the pages to reflect like some of the songs in it and from them. So you'll have a page that has it's drawn as Iron Man. You'll have a page that for like Hole in the Sky. And one thing that I knew I wanted to do was acknowledge kind of the eras of Black Sabbath where they didn't have Ozzy or Dio
Mm,
singing. And so I decided to homage the infamous Jim Steranko page with like Bucky and all these like Bucky's head and face and everything is kind of like
mm.
melting. And I just put in all instead of that all the other lead singers for Sabbath as I explained who they were, and then
Cool.
describing their first reunion with Ozzy. So
Yeah, so when it comes to a lot of these artworks, right? Are you writing it first and then having the artist draw after you on kind of some of the imagery, or are you have getting sets of imagery like you're basically doing a jam session with them in the sense of saying, "Hey, I want it to look like this, this, and this, and I'll write the story behind it." Like, which way do you go?
It's kind of like a jam session. I get a script and I basically just write panel one, write what goes in it, and then I write the dialogue. I do a dialogue pass after it's, and then the artist draws it.
Okay.
Uh, then I guess I kind of do like a dialogue pass after the artist draws it because the way they draw it might, with the body language, it might be different than what I wrote. But the the dialogue, I guess, gets the point across kind of too for like the mood of the scene.
Okay.
But if the artist wants to be creative with it, I let them know. However, sometimes I do put specific things in panels because you know, I want it to like kind of subtly suggest that something else is going to happen, or to like kind of hit people with like, oh, that was that, later
Hmm.
on. I
Yeah,
want,
I mean, you're like the producer basically of a movie, but instead of an actual movie, you're doing it in a comic book. So it's like some awesome type of ways to kind of tell a story in the sense that you're changing, not like on the spot, but kind of making sure that the direction of the comic goes the way that you're looking for.
yeah.
So when you say that your writing style is a certain like flow structure, like who would you say that you kind of emulate or look up to in the writing world that kind of drew you into the, no pun intended, that put you into this like writing mode?
Mm. I would say Alan Moore was definitely one. He'll always be an influence because he just loves Grant Morrison. I love Grant Morrison. Frank Miller. Um, Mark Miller. I love his work. It's just so bombastic. Um, Garth Ennis. And right now, I'd also say that I really enjoy the works of David Mack and Larry Hama.
Okay.
Larry Hama, definitely.
Yeah. And now that you're going kind of into a different comics and stuff like that that you're working on, what's the latest stuff that what's the latest stuff that you could talk about that you're currently working on?
Well, here's what's this one is gonna be this is my first real kind of a bigger saga, I guess you could say. I've been writing in issues of Bold and the Brave, and one of the things I noticed was, and I'm going to give you a source of inspiration right here. I've always had a curiosity about like Golden Age characters. Ever since Project Superpowers came out, or actually more so since JSA,
Hmm.
the old DC book. And what I've always wanted, I became kind of fascinated with like, Marvel's Golden Age characters, but then Superpowers came out and it was kind of something to do with the public domain. And there was this set of characters that anybody could use
Hmm.
because nobody was using them. So what I wanted to do was, I always wanted to do something. And at Tidal Wave, I noticed that Darren did an issue with Blue Beetle. And I decided, and I had always wanted to take kind of a crack at Miss Mask. So I asked if I could do it.
Okay.
And basically, as I started crafting my new Miss Mask, I'll get into it. I started to I found like a more elaborate story,
Hmm.
and as it got writing, and rather than having it just be in Bold and the Brave, Darren decided we're going to do a new book called Odyssey,
Okay.
which is going to contain that story. Now, but what's great is it's a new Miss Mask. Costume's the same, but we tweaked it. And it's the granddaughter of the original.
Okay.
And what's gonna make our Miss Mask different from like the Superpowers incarnation, which is Masquerade, or what Alan Moore did, um, or basically any other like revival, is that this one, her mask allows her to see from 1,000 angles and brings them all together, so she never misses. And so she's a crack shot. She basically can see everything that's coming. You can't get a surprise on her.
Okay.
Um, and there is magic involved with this mask. And it allowed me to backdoor and coming. off of a tangent, there was this book I read. Actually, I'll go get it right now. Um, Called The League of Forgotten Superheroes. And in it are a lot of cool ideas that maybe didn't translate well or maybe could be dusted off. And one of the things, there is one character in it that is directly involved with the mask, but it also allowed me to craft that someone is after the mask.
Okay.
And I decided the person that's after the mask is a character named Dr. Hormone. I'll read actually a passage about who he was, and what just got me into that, and how he kind of like is a guy that's been around from World War II, experiencing with the grandmother, his connection with Miss Mask's mother, actual mother and father, and then finally our new Miss Mask. Um, all right. Basically, he's an aged scientist who has spent the whole of his life studying the beneficial powers of hormones. Evidently, his uh, he is rejuvenated upon his deathbed by a youth hormone of his own invention. Now a fit and energetic young man of 25, the doctor and his granddaughter Janie bring the mighty power of hormones to benefit the world. Old women are made young again. Babies are grown into men. Boy Scout troops are transformed into full-grown soldiers. An entire nation is transformed into half-animal human hybrids to repel an invading army. It's actually sort of horrifying as Dr. Hormone plays fast and loose with the lives of children and babies.
Mm-hmm.
How many other heroes would be proudly celebrated by a caption describing how he experiments on a dying infant? And I just, was reading about him, and I went back and read his stories, and I'm like, this guy sounds like Mr. Sinister a bit.
Yeah. And Dr. Moreau, yeah.
Yeah. So I decided that he's gonna have a connection with the new Miss Mask's long lost mother. And over the course of Odyssey, we're kind of gonna see how he really developed it on this, because it's gonna involve him kind of stealing fire from another Golden Age character that's long forgotten called the Sorceress of Zoom. And it allowed me to carve out my own corner of Tidal Wave.
Mhm.
And it allowed me to kind of get, some new things in there that's different. And it allowed me too to like not only to get to play with other characters in the Tidal Wave universe and carry over some themes from the Atlas series, it allowed me to do some ideas that I always wanted to do. Like, there's one issue that's set in the mall, because the main character Atlas works in a mall as a security guard, and it allowed me to revisit, like the comic book store owner he's friends with, and it allowed me to actually put the other characters in the mall, see some stuff about them, and there's a little thread that's connecting everything. But that was a lot of fun to write. It's actually more difficult to write than people realize because you got to map out your mall.
Yeah.
And another story that is I do with Dr. Hormone is maybe a little variation of the Hulk, but with a little twist. Um, that he's when he hulks out, it's kind of killing him. You know,
Like
kind of
a
like
Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type of situation.
yeah. But the difference is with this one is that his heart, kind of like what happened with Andre the Giant, is sort of expanding. That's
Uh,
all. That's all going to be coming up in Odyssey. The first issue, I believe, is launching in August. Uh, the new Miss Mask and Dr. Hormone are going to be in Bold and Brave number 42, which I think you can get on Amazon. You can pre-order like on Kindle.
okay.
Um, I get that. Oh no, it's coming up.
Yeah, so this is all great stuff, and I want to make sure that people kind of as you're looking can kind of take a look and see kind of like what they're what's getting you started in the sense of pitching an idea like this, right? So Take us kind of like through your thought process in the sense of coming up with a new title, or taking a story that's pre-existing, kind of similar to what you just did, and then be able to pitch it like to a grander audience. As a writer, I'm sure that a lot of it is like, listen, you have to imagine this going on. So take us kind of like what your pitch method is.
My pitch method is I kind of do like, are you talking about like how I write or how I send
So
it?
so you wrote something. You have a general idea of kind of like what you want the full story to be, but you want to be able to flesh it out. In order to do that, you want to get a backing, right? So take us like through how you would pitch it to like a publisher, and see if they will move forward with it or not.
All right, so basically what you do is you create a like a one-page document. You begin with like a log line, which is like your elevator pitch, like what if I'll take you through one of my stories right now, but we're in fairy tale theater. What if the Wicked Queen from Snow White started banging Conan?
Okay.
And then you kind of like describe sort of the events and really what it's about. And I decided that this would be a story more about beauty standards, but told from a very, very absurd point of view. And like with that one, like if I'm taking, so with something like that, I kind of like was like, all right, how would Conan fit into Snow White? And he basically, all right, he starts, boinking the Wicked Queen. Wicked Queen still has a problem with Snow White. And so she gives him the message to go kill her, meets the dwarves and her, and he basically decides he'd just rather do her mom.
I mean,
He tells
sometimes
her
that
this.
happens, I guess.
Yeah. And the dwarves also are kind of like there's a reason why they never touched her. She ain't short and hairy enough for them, kind of like in Lord of the Rings. So he basically goes back with a fake thing, and she gets mad again. Um, and then you learn what happens when a Conan-like character eats a poison apple. Uh, it won't kill him because he's been poisoned way too many times, but it's certainly how
Built
should I
up an
put
immunity, I guess you could say.
yeah, but it certainly allows him to, and all I'm gonna say is stink up the place.
Okay, got you.
Um, but and it was like during that where I put in like what it's about, and he's like telling the Wicked Queen about how hot she is and really, how she's better than her daughter and like all that. But then you realize, they get with the magic mirror. So why is this mirror, kind of like effing with this woman, this whole
Yeah,
time? And we find out a reason, which I put in, and I think it was a clever twist. Um, but overall, it was but that and so like I came up with that one, and basically you'd write up like a one-page summary of what it is, mention what it's about, kind of compare it to other works. That's what I did with Disciple, which I round up doing on Kickstarter, which I described as Raw meets Sandman meets so you do that, then you send it, and they'll either take it or leave it. Sometimes, like with Darren at Tidal Wave, I give him like my idea for. I was like, "Oh, I'd like to do Miss Mass." And he's like, "Okay, come up with something as long as it has 10th Muse in it." So I went and I did that, and I just started. I would just run the ideas by him, and he'd say yes or no, or just leave that one to the side for now.
yeah.
And or if like they have plans for something, they'll let you know. They'll be like, I can't really do that. But overall, it's just like a one-page summary. And then, do you want to get into like my writing process or anything like that?
Sure. I mean, like my whole thing is if somebody's listening to this podcast and let's say they're a fan or they're somebody that's up and inspiring, right? I wanted to know what your general idea through the process goes through, so that way that person, if let's say they're at a writer's block or something like that, that they could kind of say, okay, this is what I have to get prepared to get to the stage, right? To where you're
Hmm.
at now, where you're actually actively writing comic books, because that's their passion. That's what they want to do with their life, and it makes them happy. And kind of just take them through that. So that's kind of like the line of thinking for that process.
Hmm. Yeah, if I was gonna give advice, I guess like the advice I would give is what Larry Hama says, character trumps plot. Um, Try to have your scenes end on a page, like no more than like a page or two. And you know, and yeah, and so that those are things I guess that are big ones. The big one is that characters trump plot and figure out like what your story is about. Like what's the story you want to tell.
Okay.
Once I've got all that figured out, maybe I'll write a summary or I'll just basically do what I call the splashdown, where I basically just type up or I just put down my ideas. I scribble them down where whatever I can write on, whether it's a napkin or just a notebook or even a or on my phone. I write down like the ideas that I have, thinking about what's going on, what would happen, and figure out what works, what doesn't, because you get and because it's usually all over the place. Then I do a page by page outline where I basically am like page one, this happens, page two, this happens, page three, this happens, etc. And then and see how that works till I get to like 22 pages, which is the average length of a script. Then I go to full script using that kind of as my roadmap, but things change. But um that and then I do the script, send it off to whoever like either a workshop or if I'm doing something on my own or my editor and take the notes, make those adjustments, then it goes to the artist, gets drawn, boom.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's very important to kind of like draw out I keep using that that pun. But basically line up the different things that you need to kind of eventually become that writer of that book, right? If you had to pick a book, right, out there, and I know that you've kind of named a couple already, but if you had to pick one book out there that in the comics that really inspired a lot of your methodology of writing or even just the passion for writing, what book would you say would be the book that kind of like said, you know what, I really, really think that this is the book that for the rest of my life, if I can never read anything else, this is the book that I needed to read.
Larry Hama's G.I. Joe from Marvel.
Nice. Okay, awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It
No,
was
and go ahead,
it was
flesh it
just
out.
how he created just like this intricate saga, like with Snake Eyes, who by the way couldn't talk. Started it in how it kind of like ground zero for him happened in Vietnam with him and Storm Shadow and Stalker on Long Range Recon Patrol. Then, you go into how um when Snake Eyes family was in the car accident, it turns out that the drunk driver was Cobra Commander's brother, and that was the last straw that put him over the edge. There's all these different pieces and characters and just character-based stories that just hooked you, and you got emotionally invested in what was happening and you cared about what happened, and add to that, you had like, all the G.I. Joe toy stuff in there. That was kind of the gimmicks, but that was kind of what was, kind of secondary. And Larry Hama, because he was in the military, put in like military jargon, and so that gave it kind of an authenticity. And then you had like stuff like, just like with the ninjas and then the characters' quirks, like Roadblock. He's this giant machine gunner who carries like giant machine guns that are like twice his size. He's muscled up, he's bald. But then you realize that he's a world-class gourmet. There's one issue where he's on a stakeout with Duke, and there's in a French restaurant and he's just complaining about the food. He's just like, "This is terrible. You call this a souffle?" And or like when you learn that, he was in Boy Scouts, but he couldn't do it because it interfered with choir practice. It was just
Uh,
those little things, that you learned about the guys that helped make it a bit more, real, with their backgrounds.
yeah.
And then you could stick them into certain situations. CoverGirl being a model, you could do something in the model realm. But, and in the end, it always came down to Joe versus Cobra. And you got like then like motivations for like the Baroness and Destro. And, he explored why someone would join Cobra through a character that was also in Recon with Snake Eyes, but got captured and left behind, and how everybody kind of like looked down on Vietnam vets at the time, and Cobra took them in, and that's how Cobra got people. So it was just stuff like that that made me realize, oh, there's more thought put into this than just here's a fight. And it was a cool, sprawling storyline that finally got wrapped up in a final issue where Snake Eyes gets a letter from this guy's kid about wanting to join the army, and he kind of then puts his own voice on the series, which I thought was cool. Um, so that's why I always say I'll keep that one. That's kind of my roadmap. And I see a lot of what Hama did with that in everything from like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, Sandman, um, definitely Claremont's X-Men. If anything, I think he kind of got that from Claremont. And even Grant Morrison went like with his runs on Batman, and of course, you see it. You start seeing a lot of what he did in those books, and it kind of was like kind of like built like the skeleton of how to like look at comic book writing.
Yeah, that's
So.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, now let me ask you a question. So I run a Comic Con, right, and I'm a promoter.
Hmm.
Uh, so I'm sure that you venture to the cons. Um,
Hmm.
Tell me the experience of a writer, because I mean, everybody kind of always talks about the artist, right? But not a
Hmm.
lot of people talk about the writers. They do sometimes, especially when there's big runs and they have these big stories that came out. But take it through the perspective of an indie writer, somebody that is in the back end, usually throughout the time. Um, take me through like the Comic Con experience. What kind of makes you successful as a writer in a Comic Con world?
I guess if I can sell a book, that's big. But yeah, it's definitely different for writers because artists, you can get their pages, you can get you can get them to draw something for you, and it's just like, hey, I drew this, and I'm like, oh, I wrote it. And you try to strike up conversations with people, but yeah, it's definitely a harder sell.
Mhm.
Um, you kind of wish you could be on, maybe you get invited on a panel to talk about your work because maybe then that could draw people to your work. But yeah, I mean, I haven't done a lot of cons recently. But I mean, obviously, as you know, like they can be expensive, and I don't have a car right now, so it's hard for me to transport things to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
there. Um, but I definitely want to get back on the circuit, but I need to get some stuff like ready for it, like on the business end.
yeah,
Being a writer, I'm not that great at. Doesn't mean I can be taken advantage of, but
yeah,
but
yeah.
if somebody needs something, like if I do stuff like locally that I can get to, and you know maybe and I sit there and I basically just hope someone comes over and talks to me. Um, it's kind of hard. Like you can't really bring a megaphone and be like, yeah, I want to bring a megaphone and be like, hey, over here, look at me.
Yeah,
But nah, that's kind of frowned upon.
yeah.
Buy
Oh,
my book.
yeah. So, in talking about, writing and stuff like that and kind of your experience, and kind of all the writers that you've known throughout your time in doing so, what would you feel would be the collab of the century, right? Whether that be another writer that you'd be working with, like if you collabed on a book, or an artist that you'd be working with, who are your like top two people that you would want to work with in your career?
Hmm. In terms of co-writing and
Either co-writing, like either co-writing, both, right? Co-writing and artistry, or just writing, either or.
let's see, I'm gonna go with artist. Ooh. Tough one.
I didn't say I was going to ask easy questions.
Oh yeah, no. I'm trying to think that it's just because there's so many.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I kind of, you know what? I'd like to do something with Brian Hitch.
Okay.
I always loved how he kind of like had the realist, he had the realism, but also kind of put like the full. He has such good sense of like motion
Mhm.
and action that you really are in it with him. You know, if you look at Ultimates or his Authority, yeah, it's beautiful, but it is in your face action, and he just knows how to like with one panel start the punch and then just boom, like have like within the third nail you with it, or have like the Hulk ripping up stuff and just having like battle scars and just his faces with intensity. I'd like to do something with him.
It's
That'd be
awesome.
great.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's a great artist, and that's kind of like the reason why I like to ask these questions is because there's a lot of things that inspire people. There's a lot of things that kind of bring people to the forefront of you know history, right? And sometimes when you throw stuff into the universe, it happens, right? So I
Hmm.
figured, why not throw that out there? Who's the artist that you'd always want to work with? You never know, it might happen, or it's happened already. You never know. Now, if you can. I just want to get your final thoughts on the sense of like how you feel about the comic book world, what you would tell people to like if they wanted to come into this industry, how to protect themselves, how to make sure that they are as you said, not taken advantage of, but they are able to enjoy it and still maintain the love of comics, so that they can work in that industry for years to come.
Um, have a day job.
Okay.
That would be the first thing. You're not going to make a lot of money doing this. Especially when you're a writer, you actually have to invest to hire your artist. So start, socking away some money to pay your artist and focus maybe on like one issue stories, or like if you're going to serialize something, serialize it in like 8-page sections, because to try to first of all to try to do is show that you can do a story quickly and easily, but also, just to work on your pacing and things like that. And know what you're getting into. Know the horror stories, okay? And realize that this is the world, and you as a new guy are not going to change it. I mean, so if you're going to work on and create characters for like Marvel or DC, you're going, that's, they're the ones with the power. And you're a client, so yeah, they're gonna retain ownership of that character. Now, when it comes to creating those characters for Marvel and DC, or for Tidal Wave, like I do, figure out, well, how would this character work in the context of their universe so that it is uniquely a 10th Moose villain or a Spider-Man villain? Um, and how it wouldn't work, like on its own. Like, take for instance Venom. All
Mhm.
right, he's a Spider-Man character. He doesn't exist without Spider-Man in some way. That's why he exists in the Spider-Man world, and
Mhm.
so he couldn't really exist anywhere else. Cable, for instance, another one. Um, Deadpool with the Weapon X program. They work within the Marvel universe. They wouldn't be the same thing outside like over at Image or at Extreme. I mean, they did similar characters, but it's not the same. They don't have the same they don't
Backstories, origin stories, however you want to call it, yeah,
yeah.
and interconnections, right? So.
Yeah. And the other thing would be, with that, um understand that you're collaborating with someone, so don't just dismiss your artist. Actually let your artist kick in ideas. Um, and realize that it's a tough climb, and you know, you just keep you get and if you're gonna be writing, I would say always outline. And if you get stuck, maybe just you're gonna write things more than once. You're not gonna get it right the first try. And if you're serious, you'll show it to people in like a workshop, like join a workshop, and you'll get feedback that can really help you. And that you know what, you're not gonna get this right the first time. So just try something, see where it leads to. If that path doesn't work, if you hit like a wall and it just doesn't, and you just are like, there's nowhere more to go, start again, or just maybe try to, yeah. I mean, basically, don't be afraid to take the different paths, see where it leads you, and if it leads to something that interests you, um, which is the main thing you need to do, because if you're not interested in your story, nobody's going to be interested in your story.
Yeah,
So,
awesome. That's great advice. Yeah, and Todd, listen, I really appreciate interviewing you and you coming on to the podcast. This is a way for like my Comic-Con to help people that might not necessarily be a guest at my Comic-Con, but be able to do something a little different in the sense of being able to interview indie artists and comic book creators and writers so that they could get a platform to kind of get, you know, more information out there about things that they do. So I want to thank you again for allowing me to interview you. Just to give everybody information, Icon Comic Con is going to be November 1st in Fishkill, New York at the Fishkill Rec Center from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The tickets are only $5 for anybody that's above 12 years old. So 12 and up, you're only $5. Anybody 11 and down is all free. We have already 5 guest artists that are going to be there. We also have 2 voice actors, and we're also working on some more comic book vendors. So, you know, we're also going to have writers there as well. So anybody interested, you know, just stop on by. It's a local con. It's out of a gymnasium, but it's, you know, it's pretty different than the bigger cons where everybody's crowded and you're so packed that you can't move. It's where you could actually have some time to talk to the creators, to talk to these different artists and really get to know them. Get your book signed. It's we also have a comic book facilitator there, so it's some great stuff that we have. Icon Comic Con is in their 4th iteration. Again, it's November 1st. This podcast behind the comic book podcast is for this event, and we want to really help promote it and show that we're all about comics and the creators that make them, because without you guys, we wouldn't have the stories and the great memories of reading through all these different stories and characters to eventually emulate them in some cases, cosplay, Halloween, what have you, and look up to these heroes. So that being said, everybody, this is the Behind the Comic Book Podcast. I'm Mr. 845.